And you can send it to Yazdi Tantra in Bombay, and he will, within hours, usually because of the time difference, he will post it on YouTube.
Perfect.
So if you send him the MP4 file on cloud, he will do, he will post it on YouTube. The host will have to do that.
Yeah.
Hello, this is Farhad Sidwa joining the meeting.
Welcome, Farhan.
Want to make an MP4 of this webinar? I can do it. I have an application.
Yeah, it's recording now, and then I'll send out the MP4 when it's
Okay,
done.
you have it. That okay, thank you. There is an application by the name Snagit. It will capture video, audio, everything.
Great.
Hi, Rustam and all. How are you doing here?
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Faridun. Good morning.
Good morning, guys. Thanks so much for setting this up.
Yeah. Faradun and Natasha, you can start whenever you feel like.
Natasha and Mary, are you guys both on the line?
Yep.
Mary, are you on the line?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's go ahead and get started then. So guys, everyone, you're in for a treat today. Today we'll be talking about negotiation. And we have two rock stars here to help us take us through the art of negotiation. One of them is Natasha, who's the COO and founder of Beauty by Dolly, a big business in San Diego that deals with threading. And she's also obtained her MBA from the UCLA Anderson School of Management. So she'll be teaching best practices from what she's learned from her MBA. And Meher Bharucha is currently a senior sourcing manager at Tesla and is also worked as a sourcing lead in Apple and Unilever. So Natasha and Meher, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. So my name is Meher Bharucha. I'm a staff strategic sourcing manager at Tesla, where I negotiate some of our key battery contracts, and that's pricing terms and any kind of other dispute that we may have. I've really enjoyed developing my negotiation style over the last few years, but always find that I fall back on the same four-step framework.
Mayor, I'm so sorry, do you mind muting everybody?
Yeah. Perfect. So yeah, I've enjoyed developing a negotiation style over the last 4 years, but always fall back to kind of the four-step framework that we'll take you through today in hopes that it helps all of you with some of your negotiations as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Natasha. I own a local business here in San Diego. We have a couple locations. We also have an e-commerce business online where we sell our products. My negotiation is less on the money side, but negotiating in general. Every single day, being a business owner, you're negotiating constantly. Mayor's going to kind of talk about a little bit later how every facet of life involves negotiations. So I think we bring a really good mix together to bring some good tips to you guys. So we wanted to start off by talking about why negotiation and negotiating matters so much. So here are a few statistics that we found that are really kind of striking and makes you realize that people aren't negotiating as much as they should be. There's tons of reasons why people don't negotiate. It's out of shyness, embarrassment, you don't know how, you don't know enough about the topic to be able to have a really good negotiation with the other party involved. So some statistics that we found that are really important and interesting that kind of strikes us was that in terms of women, so 60% of women have never negotiated their salary. That's really, really huge. And then only 7% of women choose to negotiate in general versus 57% of men. So that could be about really any topic. It doesn't necessarily mean salary. It could be any host of items that women don't choose to negotiate on. And I think that comes from a huge range of reasons, but I think when you have skills to negotiate, I find that you feel more confident in negotiating, not only in work-wise, not only in salary-wise, but in your everyday life. You'll see that negotiation is so important. Another really huge statistic that we found is less than 15% of consumers have ever even tried to negotiate a medical bill. And if any of you have ever tried to negotiate some kind of medical bill, you'd see that actually medical billing at whatever facility that you're going to, they're really willing to work with you in terms of bringing your medical bill down. Hospitals and doctors' offices really just want to get paid versus getting nothing. So they're always willing to negotiate with you. Very few people actually go through the rigor and really trying to take the time to negotiate. So, and then another one really quickly is just negotiating buying a car. A lot of people feel shy. A lot of people don't want to do it. They feel bad. That's probably one of the most, important negotiations and easiest negotiations you could do, because that's seen as like a one-time transaction where you don't really even ever have to deal with this car salesman ever again. So that's probably one of the easiest negotiations that you could ever really have. So we'll talk more about this, but we wanted to talk about a little bit why negotiation is so important.
Natasha did a great job explaining why negotiation matters, but why do we also need to prepare for negotiation? And I found this quote when we were putting these slides together, that the most dangerous negotiation is the one you don't know you're in. So having a framework and preparing to utilize that framework will help you feel more prepared and get a better outcome for yourself every time, even if you don't fully recognize that you're in a negotiation. These are the 4 steps we're going to walk through. I'm sure a lot of you already know these tips, but I hope that putting all of it together will be helpful for you the next time you walk into a negotiation. So we'll go through these 4 steps, some examples within each step, and then also go through 2 case studies. The first step is to research and to take your time now so that you can move very quickly in the future. For me,
at the same time you buy the dozen. The last dozen.
Sorry? To me, taking your time right now, in doing a lot of research, is very important to feel more confident in steps 2 to 4. So things that you want to research in this phase are what you want, but also what your counterpart wants. And the process of negotiation, you can think of negotiating as just trading one thing for another. So if you understand what your counterpart wants and you can assign a weight to what your counterpart wants, then you can trade things that you want that are equivalent weights. History is queen, and I'll give you an example in the next slide of a situation where history can change the negotiation. You should always know your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, so plan B or plan C. And you should be an expert in the field, in the market, in the industry, so that you feel more confident in what you're negotiating. So going through an example, you and your husband are trying to buy a house. There are qualitative things that you may negotiate, and there are quantitative things you may negotiate. So would you rather have your own bathroom sink or a walk-in closet? Does your husband want a garage or a basement? And then quantitative, what does the average square footage in your dream location cost? And how much better are the school districts in one location versus another? The very traditional negotiation in this situation would be you negotiating with someone who is selling their house. But there are other negotiations that may happen. Like, for example, if you are trying to identify a house that both you and your husband want, what are some of the things that each of you are willing to give up? But here's kind of where history also plays in, because say, for example, 2 weeks ago, you and your husband had a very large argument over the bathroom sink and having to share the bathroom sink. So now what do you think that he thinks is more valuable to you, the bathroom sink or the walk-in closet? And the answer is, if you've already had arguments over the bathroom sink, then he probably thinks that the bathroom sink is more valuable to you. And therefore you can use that as a higher weight negotiating card than what you normally would. The next step is to anchor. The anchor in a negotiation is who throws out the first offer, because it is generally about where you would land. And here it is very important to understand the personal relationship that you have with that person and understand what situation they're in. So some things you should ask here is who needs to steal more. Generally, the person who needs to deal more will be the person who throws out the anchor first. How much time do you have to negotiate? So if someone has a lot of time to negotiate, then they will likely throw an anchor that is very far and aggressive. And how far apart are you? If you throw out an anchor that is very far from where you may end up landing, there is a much higher likelihood that the other party will just walk away because they're not interested in investing the time if you're very far apart.
Okay, so we have another example here of where a client needs a cleanup done in their basement due to mold, due to some kind of water damage that occurred in their basement. So they're looking to get this fixed, and so they're looking to see different prices on that. So let's look at the contractor's point of view, and then we'll talk about also the client's point of view. So the contractor knows that mold cleanup, for example, has high profit. So this is a little bit of history from the contractor side. He knows that this job really has high profit. And this person that he could potentially do this cleanup for has clients who could also, has friends who could also be clients in the future if he does a really good job. He also personally knows about himself that not many other jobs are going on right now. For example, if he's in COVID time, people don't really want someone in their house unless it's an emergency. So he's kind of in need for new jobs, but he also had a little cushioning. So he's okay, but he could definitely do other jobs. He doesn't necessarily love this mold cleanup because, number one, it's time consuming. And also it's not a very, sexy type of job that he could really market on his website and on his Yelp page, for example, as something that looks really great, like a before and after in a kitchen. When we look at the client side, we know that this client also has this idea where she says, well, I really want to turn my basement into a game room. And so once I really get this fixed and this mold taken care of, if this contractor does a great job, then potentially I might hire him to do this other really, big job that I need done. But in terms of, on the other side of the history, this client has called 7 other contractors and all of them have declined the job because no one really likes to do this big, messy kind of cleanup. Also, this water damage is starting to generate mold. It's been a long time that it's been going on, and so she really needs to get it fixed. So now, if we look at, we're thinking the contractor has more leverage, right? Because the client really needs this job done. Water damage can basically ruin your foundation of your home and all that kind of stuff. So who should throw out the first offer in this case? We would say assumption is contractor should be throwing, oh, sorry, I thought we were just saying it, I apologize. Well, we decided that contractor should throw out the first offer. And the reason why we say the contractor should throw out the first offer is because the client really needs this job done. She really needs it done. She kind of doesn't have any other option, and she's called 7 other people. And generally we always say, I think the rule of thumb is when you're doing research, you just call 3 people, get 3 quotes and kind of choose from there so you don't have this huge different wide range, pool range to pick from. But she called 7 people and there was no one. This is the 8th person. So really, we assume that, this contractor has a lot more leverage in this case. Again, the difference between who has leverage can be based upon history. So for example, if the client knew the contractor doesn't have any other jobs going on and he really needs the money, then potentially the client could have more leverage. If the contractor knows that the client called 7 other people and no one's available, well, the contractor can kind of throw out any number he wants, and the client has really no option but to take what he's offering because she really just needs this work done. So here's a really great example of where history is queen, exactly what Mir was talking about earlier. This is why history is so important in negotiating, because if you know the background of the situation, either through the contractor side or client side, you basically can hold all the leverage in that situation. So when we try to think about the 9 innings, we think about how it's a marathon, it's not a race. It's not something that's gonna happen with one phone call. It's not gonna be something that happens with maybe one conversation. You have to really prepare for this full 9-inning game. You're not just going from A to Z like you would be in a race, for example. Think of a baseball game where you are quite literally going the full 9 innings and you are, you don't just get to do a home run. It doesn't always happen that way. It can sometimes, but chances are it doesn't really necessarily happen that way. So prepare for that full 9-inning game. Don't expect it to happen right away. Don't expect it to be something that happens with the snap of a finger. It's something that takes a lot of time. So bring in help when you need a bad cop. Bring in a bad cop when you need help. And that bad cop can be your manager, it can be your husband, it's kind of whoever is a partner in that negotiation that has a little bit more leverage in terms of what you're trying to figure out. So if it's work-wise, it would be maybe your boss or your manager. If it is that, for a home purchase, it could be your husband or whoever is the other party that has a really big stake in that negotiation and that final result. Again, be patient, don't expect results, right away. This is something that really takes time and takes a lot of finesse, and I would say even massaging, and really trying to get what you're looking for takes time. So also when we think about negotiating and knowing what we want, we look at kind of throwing out more extreme demands followed by slow, smaller concessions. And why we say that is, yes, you don't want to throw out your anchor and have it be some outrageous number that doesn't make sense for the other party, but you definitely want to start off closer to a number that you are looking for. If you start out in the middle, chances are you're going to be leaning towards your counterpart's number if you're negotiating something in terms of like a price. You're definitely going to end up leaning towards that. If you start out a little bit more extreme and start out closer to a number that you're looking for, you're definitely probably going to end up closer to what you want. And also, you always need to be willing to walk away from your negotiation. If you are not willing to walk away from your negotiation, you have already lost the negotiation going into it. So that's where your BATNA comes in. If you remember just from a few slides ago, Mayor talked about knowing your BATNA. So that's the best alternative, which means if you have a house that you want and that's your number one, but be prepared to have potentially a plan B, so a second house that you could also buy, a plan C, a third house that you're looking at that's also interesting. If you have those backups, you know that you don't necessarily need, although you want maybe house A, but you do have house B and C also lined up. So that's really important as well. So here's another example of kind of what we just discussed. So for example, there's this corner store and the storekeeper who owns that store has raised the price of milk by 10 rupees or dollars and refuses to reduce the price. And it kind of just came out of nowhere. So how do we go about this in terms of getting back down closer to that price that you're used to paying? So your first 6 innings, you're kind of, this is where you kind of finesse them and you talk to them and you try to, ask them, why did the price increase? Did something happen? Remind them about your loyalty, how you've been going there for years, how your family has been going to the same corner store. So this is where these relationships matter. You kind of talk to them about their day. So you change the subject a little bit. You kind of let them know that this is like, personal relationship, you're interested in them, that kind of thing. And then you bring in examples also through this conversation about other stores that potentially have lower prices that you're aware of. And that's again where your research matters. And then you can also complain about, although, oh, I know those other storekeepers, I can go there, but I don't want to because I love your store, it's clean, it's this, it's that, whatever it may be that is a compliment for that person. It's important to also let them know this is why I'm choosing to stay with you. If you have a landlord and you're trying to negotiate a lease or something like that, let them know, hey, there are tons of other options, but I love being here, and give them, reasons why, for example. So when you get to that 7th inning, if you really haven't been able to reach any sort of agreement with the person that you're negotiating with, you would bring in that, your partner, your bad cop, your boss, your husband, whoever it may be that's important in that negotiation as well, who has a lot more, leverage per se. Have them come in and also complain about that price increase. What's the issue? Why did this happen? I can do without this product. I don't really need it. I will go somewhere else, whatever the case is. Kind of have them come in to back you up and let the other person know who you're trying to negotiate with that, hey, we're really not going to budge here, or we may budge, but it's not going to be this significant, price increase that you've created. And then in terms of your 8th inning, again, you're going to give this final lowest number you're willing to pay, which is what you would call your extreme demand. And if you don't get it, just be willing to walk away, and you can potentially come back tomorrow. If they really are just completely not budging, then you can just be willing to walk away and go somewhere else. And then finally, in your 9th inning, you come back again. You try to have conversation with them. You really don't want to lose your relationship with this person. You've been involved with them for such a long time. Again, we can think about it in terms of the storekeeper. We can also think about it in terms of, like I said, someone who is trying to re-sign a lease with their landlord. You really don't want to have to pick up all your stuff and move and go start up again in another location, or you don't want to have to, in this case, go to somewhere like a different shopkeeper or a different store that is farther away from your home, where you don't really know the person who's selling you the product and it's really important. Then you can go again, you can try to be nice, ask for that old price or ask for, a lower price, but be confident in that ask. And then also be okay with meeting closer to the middle. So those slow, smaller concessions are really important. So you start out and say, hey, it was originally, 40 rupees for milk and now you went to 50. Well, I'll be willing to pay 43 rupees or something. So it's really important. And then being able to get a little bit closer to the middle and maybe understanding why the price increase is there. And then also the other side of the person who is negotiating with you, having them understand where you're coming from. All of that's really, really important. So again, when you are trying to close this deal, you save your ace for the end. So if you have something that's really important that's going to help change and kind of pivot this deal, you use it then. when you're done and you're finished with your negotiation and you both got to a place where you are comfortable with that ultimate result, you memorize that deal, you read it and you read it and you read it again, and you make sure that it's exactly what you're looking for, and make sure that you remember it. So tomorrow when you go back to maybe finalize, you're very clear on what you agreed on, what concessions were, and you are completely, completely understanding every single part of it that's going on.
So guys, one of the really good points that Natasha made that I want to highlight is when you're negotiating, don't split the difference. That's one of the worst things that you can do when negotiating. Because if you split the difference, the number one factor that will yield the result of the negotiation is what your first offer was. So instead of splitting the difference, make multiple small concessions. So if they're saying, hey, I want 10 rupees for chai versus 5 rupees, say, hey, how about if I bring 5 of my friends? Will you give me a discount then? How about if I buy this also with it? Will you give me a discount? So if you make smaller concessions rather than splitting the difference, your end result of the negotiation is going to be a lot better, like Natasha highlighted.
Thank you, Faridun. So again, one last example for how to kind of have these steps 1 through 3 go really well during your close is, the example is you're leasing a car. And you had a budget in mind before you went there. You said, I know I want to spend no more than $500 a month, and I only need 10,000 miles a year because I don't drive very much. I just need a car to kind of get around the city. So you're almost ready to sign the papers. You guys have negotiated back and forth, and you just kind of want to see what else you can get through, the deal. So kind of what you've conceded already with the car salesman that you're working with is that you've got, leather interior with heated seats. You got $400 a month. It was a 2-year lease, which is $100 less than what you were willing to spend. And then they actually gave you 15,000 miles a year for this deal. And then what you're still looking for that are things that are maybe not the most important to you, but they were things that you wanted. Was an upgraded sound system in your car, and you also wanted a navigation system because you're horrible at directions, and so that was really important to you. And then SiriusXM subscription, not so important, but you just heard your friend went and got a car from there, and they gave her a free 2-year SiriusXM subscription, and so you really want to make sure you get that because that was part of something that she negotiated in her deal. So since you got such a fantastic deal already, you've already gotten $100 under your budget, you've got extra miles, which you really truly didn't need, but there's still a few things that you want. You want to negotiate this upgraded sound system and an upgraded navigation system. You let them know that you'll be willing to downgrade to 12,000 miles a year. The car dealership thinks that that's a win for them, which it actually is, because when you return a car with less miles, for them it's better because they can sell that car for a more expensive price when it has less miles on it when you return the car. So they think that's a win for them. And then in turn, you got your navigation system, you got your SiriusXM subscription. So you got these things that were important to you. And then you also gave them something back that was important to them. That's really, really good if you can negotiate like that. It doesn't always turn out that way, but in terms of purchasing a car, this is something that's really great. You are giving them something that's important to them, that is more valuable for them. An upgraded sound system or navigation is really not necessarily more important to them. It doesn't really do much for them. But when you do return the car, like I said, and you've driven less miles, that's something that's very valuable to them. So a lot of times this is really important to remember. You can negotiate and you can still have both parties win. So in negotiation, you're not trying to necessarily win. You are trying to come to an agreement that's favorable for both parties. So if you always think of negotiation as something like, I'm going to win and that's what I'm trying to do, you're not going to ever really succeed in negotiation. It's really coming to a point where it's favorable for both parties. And this is a perfect example of something that works out in both parties' favor.
Can't overemphasize here saving something for the end, because if you get to the very end of the deal and there are 1 or 2 terms that you're not completely happy with, there's no way to change those unless you've saved something to give at the end. Again, it's all about giving and taking. So going into case studies, I get very excited about negotiation case studies because generally publicly all we see is that two parties have come to a deal. So it's interesting for me to see examples where two parties did not come to a deal or have not yet in a public setting. The first example, where did this negotiation go sour? So when I was at Unilever, one morning we woke up and to the news that Kraft Heinz had bid $143 billion for us. And by the end of the day, it was being reported everywhere that we had flatly rejected the deal. I think it's quite unlikely and quite a rare instance where this is such a public offer and rejection. So it was interesting for me to look and see how this went wrong. We have the two parties, Kraft Heinz and Unilever. To me, the first step where this really went wrong was in the anchoring and where personal relationships matter. So Kraft Heinz is known for having a very aggressive and cost-cutting behavior and ethos, whereas Unilever is focused much more on climate change and social impact rather than profits alone. So say here that instead Kraft Heinz had suggested, we'll buy you for $143 billion and we'll commit to donating 20% of your profits to say like the Amazon deforestation. Unilever may have felt like they were closer to sharing the same ethos and financials of the deal and may have been willing to negotiate with Kraft Heinz a little bit more. But without matching the ethos and with Kraft Heinz's existing reputation, Unilever didn't have much interest because they felt like they were very far apart. And the next is the 9 innings where it's a marathon and not a race. So we saw in the example with the milk vendor, you took 6 innings to kind of chat with them and buy time and build a relationship. Kraft Heinz didn't really do that. They threw out a bid without taking innings 1 to 8 to warm up Unilever. And without Unilever at that point hadn't invested any sort of time into this, so they didn't have much interest in continuing the game if they felt like they were so far apart. The next case study is one that we may be familiar with, and it's the mystery offer to seek $24 billion in shares in Tata firms to cut ties. So for those who aren't familiar, the mystery family is trying to sever their relationship with the Tata Group. They're going to court in a few months. So the mystery group threw out the first offer for Tata to pay in shares cash for any marketable instrument. We look at the two parties here, SPM and Tata. And SPM, in my opinion, had done their research here quite well. They sent out a proposal where they get value out of their holdings and they get equities that they can turn into cash. They've presented an offer where Tata can remain the major shareholder of TCS and Tata Sons. And there's a non-cash settlement, which lightens the opportunity cost for Tata. What they've also done here is they were the first to throw out the offer because they would like the opportunity to cash in sooner rather than later. So they've done the right thing here by anchoring first. They've set the expectation for Tata. So the settlement will probably never go above 24 billion. And here Tata just has time ahead of trials to play out the 9 innings and chip away from the 24 billion. Thanks everyone for joining. I really enjoyed sharing this framework and some of these tips. I hope that over time you start to develop your own negotiation style and can start getting a little bit more out of every opportunity. I think now we're happy to take any kind of questions that you may have.
Hello, this is Farhad Sidva from San Diego, California. I have a question. Let's say you are visiting India and somebody in your family gets sick and you are in a small village there and there's only one pharmacy there. And he's now he knows that you have come from US and he's going to charge you like maybe 10 to 20 times more price for one Tylenol. Now there is no option for you to walk away because you need it to get well. What would be the negotiating technique there when you have no other choice but to pay like $20 for one Tylenol, let's say? How would you respond to it?
A very common negotiating lever in this instance is to offer to buy more, right? With a higher volume purchase, you may be able to negotiate a discount. So even though you only need one Tylenol, you could say instead, well, I'll buy 50 from you if you give me a 20, 30, 40% discount. I think you also mentioned that they know you're from America. So in that instance, you could potentially send someone who is more of a local, who they would be less likely to try to price gouge. Natasha or Faridun, do you have any other tips?
I think it would be important to note also, so if you're in that case and there's no one else that can go, you're the only person that can go to the pharmacy, and like you said, you're in this small village where you really can't go anywhere else to get the medicine. So for example, let's just say they normally sell this, one pill for example, 5 rupees, but they're charging you 35 rupees. You know that they'd still like to make the sale. You know that they don't have to sell it at 35 rupees. So you definitely can say, well, okay, fine. I really don't have an option, so I'm not going to offer him 7 rupees. I will still offer him maybe 10 or 15 rupees, which is still a really big profit for him, but it's a cheaper price for you. And if you, I know we're talking about something that's kind of such a small amount, but for you paying a little bit more than the average cost is still not maybe a big price tag for you, but you do need the medication to help, the person at home. So that's something that you also, as a person, when you're negotiating, just have to weigh out. So you don't want to pay this exorbitant price, but you're still willing to pay a little bit higher than average cost because you kind of don't have a choice. But the person wants to make the sale. So you offer them something that's lower, that's more reasonable, and they're still probably going to want to sell it to you either way, right? Because they don't want to lose you completely. So they're probably also willing to negotiate as well in that case.
And I have something to add, and Farad is my uncle, by the way. So in these types of situations, and what you described is kind of a difficult situation to negotiate under, where you have to go kind of outside the box. So in these types of situations, you have to really see what the other person truly values. So are they valuing purely money? Is attention something that they value? Is it something that they want to impress their boss or manager? Do they want to impress people around the village? And you can make the counter thing is, what is something that can harm them if they're playing very tough ball? In this situation, you don't have a lot of negotiating power. So you have to say, okay, what if I go to the media that you're price gouging me? What if I go to all your village friends and tell them that you're charging me 10 times the amount? What if I tell all the people that you're not, that you do these kinds of practices and that they'll not go to your pharmacy anymore? So you can and you could do the opposite also. You could say, hey, if you do this, I'll go to the media and say what a great doctor you were. Or I could go tell all my friends that you did this work at a cheap cost, even though I was in this situation. So in these circumstances, you kind of have to go outside the box. And another thing is, one of the main qualities that results in a good negotiation is assertiveness. So you can't be timid in those situations. You have to go on the attack even when you're on the ropes. So that's kind of the takeaway from this sort of situation. You have to be very tough.
Faridun has a more aggressive style of negotiation sometimes, so he has a different perspective, but it's not a wrong perspective, to be honest. There are times in negotiation where you do have to be more assertive and a little bit more aggressive and really have that strong response, because again, there are people who are not going to be be as ethical as you are. So sometimes you kind of have to do that. So going to Edel Uncle's question, it is, what do you think about the way Trump negotiates? Well, I don't know what to actually say about that. I think the less I say, the better in regards to that. But if Faridun and Mayor want to kind of pick that up, I'm happy to give that question over to them.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There is no one true way of negotiating, and you have to negotiate different ways under different circumstances, and there are a lot of variables you have to look at. Is this going to be a long-term relationship? Is this going to be a one-time transaction where you're negotiating? Do you have more information than the other party? Do they have more information about you? Do you know what they value? Do they know what you value? So all these things, you can use all these things to leverage and negotiate with each other. And ideally, it would be a friendly negotiation, but sometimes you have to get tough in certain circumstances. And the more, if you're negotiating in a position of strength, then it allows you to be more tough.
Anyone have any comments on Trump's negotiation style?
This was just the framework of how a negotiation should run so that you have an idea and you're prepared for the length of time and the different steps. I think everyone's negotiation style is different, so it's fun to, not just within work, but outside of work, to try different things to figure out your own style that works for you.
And I do think it's important to note that, so there is definitely a difference between negotiating and then, yes, there are more assertive ways to be a negotiator, and that's totally acceptable. It's important. It's important to have different styles. It's exactly what Faridun said, which is really important to know. Is it a one-time transaction? Is this someone that you're going to do constantly do business with? Is this a negotiation with your aunt? Is this a negotiation with a random person on the street that you're never going to see again? All these things are really important to notate in terms of like different kinds of stuff. So yes, someone also commented that, certain things are bullying and not negotiation. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely things that can be a little bit too aggressive that we've seen over the years, but it's a fine line between, it's actually not a fine line between being ethical and being unethical. So some people do negotiate in terms of unethical ways, and that is probably not termed as negotiating. But this is definitely, we're talking about ethical ways of negotiating, and you just do the best you can. So in terms of everyday life, you do need to negotiate, and those personal relationships really do matter, and you don't want to burn bridges just to get what you want. So again, it's not about winning. It's about coming to an agreement that works for both parties. Does anyone else?
Is there anyone that would like another question?
So, yeah, I have a question. How would you deal a dispute where somebody has stolen $10,000 from you, and you've caught that person, and now you're trying to retrieve that money from that person, but that person is very intransigent, and it's a zero-sum game for him now going forward. So he doesn't want to cooperate. How would you handle that situation?
I would call a lawyer at that point. I wouldn't deal with that. It doesn't sound like you have a very good personal relationship. So at that point, I would probably contact a lawyer or someone else. And that's where like having a bad cop is very helpful, right? You could have the lawyer play bad cop, and you could play good cop and say, look, we can get this resolved between us, or we can get authorities or someone else involved. Natasha, Faridun, do you have any other tips?
No, I think that's
yeah, I would go something along the same lines. But yeah, there's no harm in trying to contact that person, sitting down with them and seeing why they are doing what they're doing, what they want out of this. And, if that doesn't work, then like Mary and Natasha stated, probably getting another party involved that can be a little tough is probably the right path forward.
And there's also something that I've always done in my business. I know this sounds like a little bit of maybe like an aggressive way to think of something, but truthfully, you don't negotiate with terrorists. You don't. So whether that be like your person at work who's threatening you, I'm going to quit if you don't do blah, blah, blah. Well, that's not a negotiation. That's somebody who's just trying to get their way and maybe behaving in a childish manner. So if someone in this example that was presented in terms of like stealing money or something like that, so that's not a negotiation. So that's not something where both parties are equal and trying to come to a place where it's equal for both parties, or maybe more favorable in one party's direction or whatever. But you don't negotiate with terrorists. That's just truthfully. And I don't use terrorists in the way that we're thinking of, constantly hearing on the news. I'm talking about people who are just, one-sided there's no way you can negotiate with them. It's their way or the highway, and they're not willing to have any sort of negotiation. Well, then you're not in a negotiation at that point.
And that's a really good point by Natasha. Also, when you negotiate, on the flip side, also, you don't want to give ultimatums. You never want to give ultimatums because that closes up discussion, and you unlock value when you're opening up discussion, finding out what the other party's valuing.
This is Hoshi. I'd also say a couple of things. I'm looking at my Wharton framework for negotiation, and one is, what is your leverage in the $10,000? The rupee that you probably won't get back. And second is, what standards apply during that discussion? Because if it's a freestyle, no real ethics or anything, then you really don't have much that you can pull from. That's been my experience. And then you engage the lawyers and get counsel and see how best to proceed in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's all very helpful. So negotiating is one thing, and how to deal with a dispute management is a totally different field. And let's say you were the hostage and you've been kidnapped. And now how psychologically can you talk with your captor and deal with that? What can you tell them psychologically that would induce them to release you from captivity? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think that requires another level of negotiating experience. And I think that, I know for a fact that it's a very, very specific style of negotiation. So I would think of, for example, FBI dealing with that, CIA, I don't know, like that type of thing, or even, policemen, things like that. They're trained in this type of negotiation. And I think that's a very different type of negotiation than we would deal with on a regular day-to-day basis, whether that be with your employees or your family, even your children, or people you work with or trying to do business with.
There was an example years ago where a woman was kidnapped and was being held hostage. And she basically just said to the person who kidnapped her, I'm going to pray. Let's pray together. I'm going to pray with you. Let's do this. And he ended up doing it, with her. And after about 8 hours, he released her. And she was just trying to make that person feel better, feel stronger. And somehow it worked. So you never know. It's always worth trying something.
That's an excellent.
I think in those. Go ahead.
That's an excellent point, Natalie, because when you're in that kind of a situation and you're in dire straits, you have to basically and psychologically go into that other person's head and figure out what can you say to change that person's mindset. And if you can do that, like Natalie said, you can actually, wonders can happen. So I don't ever think that you should take it as a dead end. You should keep trying what's working. And sometimes the spaghetti technique works, which is you throw enough spaghetti on the roof and eventually some will stick. So you should try psychologically to keep at that person until something clicks in that person's brain. And there's some kind of a human relationship that clicks, and that person realizes what harm and consequences of his actions are. And in a situation like a hostage crisis, miracles can happen and have happened, as Natalie said. So I thank you for that, sharing that. And I would like to thank Natasha and Mayor for an excellent program. It was very helpful, very meaningful, very insightful. And thanks everybody for sharing your thoughts. And let's have some more of these programs going forward. So I invite anybody else to share what they have to talk about. So go ahead, and thank you everybody for participating.
And guys, I think Barrows wrote a really good question. She said, have you faced gender bias in negotiating? How do you handle it? So I think this is a great question for Natasha and Meher, if you guys want to answer that.
I will definitely let Meher answer that because I think she has probably great experience in terms of that. Unfortunately, I wish it didn't exist, but it's the reality of it is that it does. But I think one thing that I just want to say quickly in regards to that is that actually, of course, there are gender biases in negotiating, and because women so rarely negotiate, I think it's so unexpected that a woman will be a strong negotiator that when they are, it catches the other party off guard. So honestly, it's used to our advantage. If you have the skills and you practice these skills on a regular basis, it ends up being able to use to your advantage. Again, most of the people don't expect you to have strong negotiation skills, which allows you to basically kind of, like I said, catch them off guard. So that's something that I personally experienced in my negotiations, because people just expect you to kind of come in and say yes to whatever is offered and be complacent and kind of just be shy and timid and meek and kind of not go through the aggressive and strong negotiations. But personally, I've used that to my advantage in the past.
Yeah, gender biases definitely exist. I find that I'm much more likely to ignore them, and they generally don't affect me as long as I've done my research very well. So speaking with data and facts and understanding the history is very important so that you can avoid becoming more emotional, because women tend to be a little more emotional during a negotiation. So the research part for me is very important so that I feel fully prepared and confident when I go into a negotiation.
And another thing to deal with gender bias is if you're dealing, say for instance, you're buying a car or you're doing a negotiation on behalf of your business, you can always bring up these concerns and say, hey, is there somebody else I can talk to? If there's a salesperson who seems biased towards you, you could say, hey, could I talk to another salesperson, or come another day and try to negotiate for that. Another thing is there's been a lot of studies on the salary discrepancies between males and females. And a part of that they stated was that a lot of times women will negotiate against themselves, and that's something you never want to do. So if they get a salary offer, they won't push the envelope because they feel, oh, maybe I need to pick up the kids, or maybe I don't want to be stressed too much from this job. So I think in those cases, it's always important to know that, hey, it's okay to be assertive no matter what background you have. And just don't allow that you to be biased. You know, you can always talk to another party.
Kavasti, if I could, if I could add something in business, I've found that, you know, you run into a lot of disputes and a lot of items, and to definitely try to negotiate it rather than taking a position of not being flexible and going to lawyers, because lawyers means it's a lose-lose sort of situation. And, you know, and that has worked quite well in my case, like over 20 years of being self-employed in business. We did not end up going to, in a single case, to make it into a legal law situation. Most times we were able to negotiate, compromise, get some win-win sort of resolution. And that comes out to be far less expensive than going the lawyer route. Unless, of course, it's something very obvious, like you said, of embezzlement or some, you know, theft or something different. But if it's normal business disputes, negotiation should definitely be considered as the first, second, and third option before you decide to go to, legal recourse,
Quite true, Adel. So every situation is different, as you said. So you had to have a strategy in mind of whether I should get lawyers, whether I should do personal one-to-one. And and then see what is working. But sometimes you seem to have exhausted all other possibilities and there's nothing left because the other person is holding all the cards. You know, it's like there's a saying that possession is 9/10 of the law, and that other person knows that. So there is no incentive for them to negotiate on a monetary basis unless you're going to threaten them or you're giving them a hint that you might embarrass them. It might be bad for the legacy or how the community looks at, etc., the publicity. So there are other factors that you can bring into play. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. The other person might say, hey, go to hell. You know, that's it. I'm in possession of the goods. And, and even though the law may be on your side and I've done something wrong, you know, who cares? So that is a very tough nut to crack. If anybody wants to take a stab at that, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's always exceptions, but just, you know, just as a initial stages, as you said, it's a marathon. So definitely to try hard to resolve it. You know, I've never had good luck with lawyers, so.
And also lawyers are so very expensive, and
exactly.
the meter
So it's a lose-lose
running.
lose situation, you know.
The meter never ends.
Yeah.
All right, guys, does anyone else have any questions?
Anybody would like to share and comment on today's program and what kind of programs they would like to see going forward?
No, this was an excellent subject. In most schools, no one teaches you negotiations, you know, and there's no subject like that. And then you're practicing it everywhere, at work, with your family, with your spouse, with your children. So it's very, very good. One good test to see how well, how good a negotiator you are is to find something your spouse does. Like, for example, puts a toothbrush on the right side of the sink and you want to make her put it on the left side. So, you know, try to justify a case and negotiate with her to change the position. If you can do that, then you're a good negotiator.
I think now, Adel, you're talking gunshot wounds.
You know, referring to our day-to-day negotiation skill requirement, I know a friend, and I don't know whether this comment belongs here or not, but would never give up. And whenever we go out to a restaurant, let's say we didn't have a reservation, we would send her. And she will somehow, no matter how packed the restaurant is, she would find us a table. She was so persistent, always. And we always remember, and every single time she had succeeded, I know that. So persistence, in short, it can also pay off, and also how you approach. If you have a gentler way to negotiate, it helps a lot. So that's why interpersonal skill is also part of this negotiation. Thank you.
So I'll give a comment. What I really appreciated Meher and Natasha touching was the framework, because framework is most important in my opinion. And over my 30 years, what it's come down to is in every negotiation, there's 5 influencers. One is you have to identify who is the coach on the other side of the organization that you're working with. And the coach is the individual who's trying to always guide you, tell you something behind their organization, how things are going on, stuff like that. Then there's the technical buyer. So the technical buyer is always wanting to know, well, what does your widget do? You know, does it perform better than Samsung's or somebody else's, right? Then there's an economic buyer, which is typically the purchasing manager, and all they care about is dollars and cents. Then the fourth one is the actual user, who says, this is all fine, but if you can't get your stuff on my production line, I'm not going to delay my Tesla, for example, because your wheel cap did not show up. So those were the 4 influences which most frameworks refer to. And my 30 years, I found a 5th one, which not a lot of people talk about, but it's always the sabotager. So these are the individuals who either have a relationship with some other company, or they have some other agenda or something which wants to derail that discussion or the negotiation that you're having. And if you, as the negotiator, as Meher pointed out, if you haven't done your research and identified those 5 key influences, then I think you're already starting off wrong, because you don't know all the chess pieces on the board, and you're going in trying to win the game. That's my experience, for what it's worth.
There was a classic case of negotiation during the midst of the Cold War, when Khrushchev and Kennedy were at the verge of lobbing missiles at each other. And the Russians had missiles into Cuba, and the US could not do nothing to stop it. But and the Russians had taken a very strong position, and they couldn't back off. But what Khrushchev did was he sent 2 letters. One said that I'm not going to negotiate, and our cause is right, and you're in the wrong. And the second letter said that yes, we will withdraw if you do X, Y, Z, if you remove your missiles from Turkey. And Kennedy immediately said, I accept this letter regarding we are going to withdraw our missiles from Turkey, and you withdraw from Cuba. And that's exactly what happened. And we did not have a nuclear third world war. So sometimes giving face to the other person and allowing them to withdraw works. And it was one of Kennedy's finest moments in history, when he helped save the entire world from destruction.
Great point. Don't push anybody in a corner that they fight like hell. Always give them a window out.
Quite true, quite true.
Yeah.
Also, there's another alternative to calling your lawyer, and that is mediation and arbitration. I know that's a whole different field, but there are several alternatives. When you come into a dead end, you have to start thinking how you can change the other person's mindset. And if you can do that, I know it's extremely difficult. Even psychologists cannot do that. But you never know. Sometimes something will click and it can work. So never give up.
I think all the points that were made today were really good. Anchoring is a big one, right? You start off with something and you anchor correctly or incorrectly. That can make a big difference in negotiations. So all of these things, I think what we touched on today were really good.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for your time. And thank you for all the organizers, Rustam, Adol, my dad, everyone, Natasha and Meher. Great presentation. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent program.
Excellent.